Welcome to the third lecture for ET454 Project Management. I'm Dr. James McCurahan, and I will be hosting this lecture. This is the third lecture in a series of more lectures regarding project management and hopefully towards passing the Certified Associate Project Manager PMI exam. So, in this lecture, we'll discuss the business case, feasibility study, and the project charter after the business case is approved. Specifically in this presentation, we'll talk about types of business cases, the business case and its contents, feasibility study, and the product or project sponsor who is responsible for the business case. As a reminder of what's been discussed in the other two lectures, first there's a need, then there is, in essence, the business case. Somebody formally puts down on paper, based upon a situation statement, why they think that or what is happening that's involving the threat, the opportunity, or the gap that we need to address to improve our organizational position. After the business case is the feasibility study, then the project charter, then the team, then if there is a project office, the project goes to the project office, and either that or a designated or selected project manager, and then there is a review of the initial project initiation phase. Here is a process flow of how things should take place. When I was looking at various organizations that provide some type of PMP training and certification, I never really saw a good process flow. For many people, process flow is important for understanding how things work. So this is my rendition of the project flow or the process flow during the project initiation phase. So first, there's a situation statement. Somebody says, hey, there's something wrong. I've identified that there's a gap, a threat, or an opportunity that we need to address within our organization. The next thing that happens is there's a project proposal. It outlines the basic concept, the vision, the benefits, and the potential impact of doing a project on the organization. Next, a business case is developed. That's a comprehensive analysis of why the project needs to be done. It includes costs, benefits, risks, potential return on investment, and it's used to make a more informed decision on whether we should proceed with the project or not. Afterwards, a feasibility study is often taken under consideration. It's a preliminary assessment of the proposed project to determine its practicality and likelihood of success. It's worth the investment in terms of time, money, and effort. Then, after the feasibility study is completed, if the project is determined to be feasible by typically executive management, then a statement of work, SOW, is initiated. The SOW details the specific work to be done during the project, and it is a basis for approving the project charter. It also helps with determining who the project manager is going to be, in case executive management stakeholders have not already considered who they would like to have as a project manager. And then after the statement of work, a project charter is developed, and it's actually a formal legal authorization of the problem by executive management, and it's used to initiate the project. Shown here on this slide is the contents of a business case. Now, business cases don't have to be this involved, but if it's a large project, you may want it to be this involved, so that to make sure that you are covering every basis regarding doing the project. So there needs to be an executive summary. An executive summary is you're going to tell them initially about the contents of the document. then you're going to tell them what's in the document, and then there's actually a reiteration at the end of the executive summary to give a basis for what the findings were in the case. There needs to be some background. In the background for the business case, there needs to be the situation statement, needs to be a discussion of the strengths and weaknesses, not only of our organization, but of the project and things of that nature. There needs to be a problems statement. There needs to be a statement saying, here's what's wrong, here's what threatens us or provides us opportunity to enhance our organization. There also needs to be a vision for the future and a solution statement. Options need to be provided, but then one option, the best option, needs to be recommended by whoever writes the business case. The recommendation should include the deliverables, the benefits, and the costs needed to implement the solution. There needs to be a project plan. The project plan most definitely is going to include the resources required to do the project, the costs involved, and the timelines. Risks and threats need to be put into the business case. They need to be elaborated and discussed how, if the risk occurs, how they might be, the risk might be mitigated. Next, there needs to be a discussion of the governance of the project, who is going to be in charge, who is going to run the project. Communication, that would be with team members on the project and also with critical stakeholders, including executive management. There needs to be a discussion of how quality is going to be assured on how to do the project, and the monitoring of the project throughout the life of the project, and then the recommended steps and the outcome of the project afterwards. So in essence, once you've done the project's in place, you need to provide an explanation of how you intend to continue to make that outcome successful. This explains the types of business cases that can be developed. One might be a simple return on investment. It's investing time and money, so you expect a yield based upon the project outcome. And next is a strategic, and that might not be a type of return on investment or dollar for dollar venture, but it may be to improve just the position or provide recognition to your organization, or to have some philanthropic output. Another is towards investment. In other words, you're doing a project to develop a basis for making money later on. As I have in parentheses, it's a we hope expansion for money-making products or outcomes. Also for value. In other words, it might be a project just to enhance the mission and the vision and the goals, or the corporate culture internally within an organization. It might be for strict research. Anyone who has written a grant, in essence, they're doing a business case. There might be a business case for improving efficiency of a product, a project, a production line, something in society, and so that's a type of business case. Also, it might be a compliance, in other words, regulatory, statutory, or fiduciary project. The flexibility of business case use. When you're doing a traditional predictive waterfall project, the business case tends to be fairly rigid. People know what the steps are, for instance, building a house. They do it repeatedly. They know the outcome is going to be a finished house that you're going to sell. So they know the stakeholders and things like that involved. So it tends to be, the business cases tend to be rigid. They don't have to be as precise, because we already know the outcome, and the planning tends to be a whole lot more involved just to get the project going. With iterative and incremental projects, the business cases may not be as involved. They might just be providing a descriptive outcome of why it needs to be done. In other words, it's a qualitative analysis in the business case for why the project needs to be done. Just to reiterate where we are in the project initiation process, we're under the feasibility study, so things afterwards will be related to that. A feasibility study, it's not something that's just generic to doing project management. Feasibility studies are done for launching a business, acquiring a rival in the business atmosphere, launching a product, discovering possibilities, considering major changes, or planning to invest, to understand the risk and rewards anticipated with the project. So it's not an uncommon thing. Feasibility is a part of the business analysis under the enterprise environmental factors recognition. It will talk about the constraints and influences on the project that will impact whether a project will be successful or not. The sole purpose of conducting a feasibility study is to determine the success rate of a business, a startup, a new product, the deliverables in the project, etc. The investigation is every factor contributing to the success or failure of the project. So, a feasibility study. A feasibility study is a project management tool that helps determine if a proposed project is practical and realistic. It includes an in-depth analysis of factors necessary for the planning of the project. It's typically a report that describes what's involved with it from every aspect. It helps identify potential roadblocks. It assesses risks. It estimates resources and resource allocation, including the money that's going to be needed to do the project, the people involved, the capabilities of the people involved with the project, and equipment. It also provides typically a cost to benefit ratio, whether that's ROI or NPV. It may or may not be used for a project approval, and that depends on the people that are in charge, the executive management stakeholders who approve such things. Typically in something like a predictive approach, that a feasibility study is not necessarily required because it's such a linear, already somewhat well-known process. Feasibility study is a crucial part of project initiation and planning. It's typically conducted before the project begins and has been conceptualized, but before significant resources and details are provided. Possible constraints to a project include economic, financial situation and the risks. Those tend to be internal to your organization. The estimated cost to fund the project, the potential return on investment, the cost-benefit analysis, the projected profits and loss. Those are economic, financial considerations and risks. There's the technical feasibility. That would be internal to the organization. It's the evaluation of the proposed system's hardware that's going to be used to make the project, organizational assets, and other technical requirements. There's also legal external feasibility. Just because you want to do a project, there may be legal ramifications. There might be existing laws that would not allow you to do a project. Large commercial projects can often encounter this, and then they are shut down or put on hold until some risk has been mitigated. Some other components that need to be considered in a feasibility study include the organizational feasibility. Some cultures are not keen to change. It takes a lot to get them to change, or at least see that change is occurring or needs to occur. And if an organization is not ready for change, then failure becomes more prevalent. The operational feasibility, just because you want to do something means that the structure of the organization, policies and procedures, equipment, even the people aren't in place to be able to have an effective outcome. And then resources feasibility. Money's obviously a consideration. the human resources, the abilities of the people and their skills, tools, equipment, and other resources are of a consideration. PMOs, project management organizations, or organizations that have a lot of projects and use PMOs, often have templates in place because projects are so frequent. And so if you look at coming from Project Manager online, there is the feasibility study on the right. It shows a template with the feasibility study, the description of the product and service, technical considerations of the project, product and service marketplace, marketing and strategy, organizational staffing, and scheduling. And so when I talked about the different types of business cases, that would lend to different types of feasibility templates being used. Somewhere in a feasibility study, there needs to be a statement of work. That statement of work will be used to get the project charter going. Okay, it tends to be initially an internal document used only by the company to address the business needs. It is used to develop the project proposal. Often that's still internal, leading to the project charter for an external review, typically by executive management stakeholders, and then leading to what's known as requirements plan. That, in other words, is what is going to be required to be done through the project. It provides an overview of the deliverables at the end of the project. Some other information regarding statement of work. It acts as a foundational document. It outlines the project scope, its deliverables, the timeline involved with the project, and the key requirements and all the parties that are involved, so there is a clear understanding of what is going to be done when the project is being undertaken. It's used with external vendors or clients to set clear expectations and avoid misunderstandings throughout the project life. Realize that it's created during the initiation phase, and then it is used for external collaborators to explain what's going on. Part of a statement of work might include a part of a proposal or a contract, and those type of things will be discussed in later slides. This is showing you a more formalized from a template statement of work. And so a statement of work might have the project name on it, project sponsor, the objectives and details, the scope of the work, what's going to be done throughout the project, the location of the work. There might be teams that are multinational or in different states, located different places, and so that will be discussed and outlined. The tasks involved that will take place during the project. It would be preliminary to put here, but there could be a Gantt chart used to provide the timeline of what will happen within the project, and then the project deliverables. Continuing on with this formalized statement of work from a template, there might be testing and standards that need to be discussed. The definition of done or the definition of success. And their DOD will more than likely be on the exam somewhere, so you need to be cognizant of that. And I'll talk about that and definition of ready later on. There'll be the project requirements and then payment terms if something is regards using third-party vendors or so forth. And then the sign-off acceptance that this is the statement of work, and it will afterwards goes into the project charter. So what's the difference between a statement of work and a project charter? Okay, so statement of work comes before the project charter, and it explains the reason for the project and provides an overview of the project and what's going to be deliverable from it. Okay, the statement of work is usually a statement of work is usually used when a project involves vendors, external contributors, and the internal project team to give them information. Okay? The project charter is based upon the statement of work and may not be as involved. The project charter may not be as involved as the statement of work. Okay? So the SOW provides information for a rough project charter, which gives the project manager the authority to kick off the project once the project charter is approved. Another difference is that the project charter comes after the statement of work. Where are we at now in the process for getting a project going? We're at the project charter process. So after the feasibility study is done, someone has reviewed it and said, yeah, this looks like a good idea. We have the funds. We think we have the people, the internal resources to do the project. Yeah, we're going to do a project charter, and this will sign off, and it'll have a statement saying these people in executive management, typically, as stakeholders, are verifying that yes, we need to do this project and we want you to get started on it. The project charter. It's created at the beginning of the project. It gets the stakeholders' approval, specifically executive stakeholders within your organization approve that the product exists. The organization is notified that there is a project in existence and is going to be initiated, and might detail how people are going to be affected and who's going to be involved with the project. It contains high-level constraints, risks, boundaries, and stakeholders, so everyone knows what's involved with the project to make it successful. The project manager, often selected by the executive stakeholder or executive management, or the product sponsor, a member of executive management too, typically, leads the development of the project charter, working with key stakeholders, subject matter experts, and other units within the organization. The project sponsor or initiator usually signs off on the project after it's been reviewed and the stakeholders approve it to allow the project manager to begin the project and develop their project management team. The project charter is a foundational document to any project. It's used to get approval. It's used to get all stakeholders, at least those internally at the beginning, involved with the project. It helps to guide the team. It defines the roles and responsibilities and sets expectations and identifies potential risks in the project. It provides a baseline. We'll talk about earned value management later on. And there are baseline for costs, there are baseline for scheduling, and so it helps to share what those baseline values are. It also acts as a contract, and it holds it tells the organization or the project team who's doing what and what they're going to be held accountable to. Provided here is an example of a project charter. This might be found on a template readily available from a project management office. So if you can see at the top, there's a project title. In this case, the example is Implementation of a New Customer Relationship Management System. There's a project sponsor. There is a project manager, direct objectives, project scope, exclusion from the scope, key stakeholders, project constraints, project deliverables, a budget, delineates a success criteria. There's communication plan involved. There's risk assessments with potential risks and even addresses the mitigation for the risks. Probabilities are stated. Assumptions are included. And also there's the project authorizing signatures and then a date of initiation for the project. So make sure you take a look at that. That's might be something interesting to know and to use. As an overview, the project charter provides a purpose for the project, discusses the objectives, has a scope, talks about the risk management, and has the communication channels and a communication plan. Here is a more detailed listing of what's involved with the project charter. There again, just like with the business case before, if it is a smaller project, it might not be as involved. If it's a smaller organization where everybody knows everybody, it might not be as involved. If it's a larger project, large organization, there may need to be this type of detail in the project charter. So what's involved with it? There's a project title, there's a project background which often references the business case. There's a scope. Scopes typically identify who, what, where, when, how, and why the project is being done. There's objectives, project objectives. Project objectives should use the SMART acronym. They should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. There should be a project timeline. In the project charter, there may be initially a Gantt chart involved. Gantt charts lead to doing a work breakdown structure we'll talk about later. There ought to be a preliminary project budget. There should be the stakeholders identifying who's involved internally and externally, and that will be impacted by the outcome of the project. There needs to be a discussion of assumptions and risks, and I'll go into those terms a little bit more what an assumption is. Needs to provide a suggested project management plan, and needs to outline whether they're going to use a waterfall approach, incremental approach, iterative approach, or maybe even a hybrid approach. And then again, identify the project deliverables, how they're going to be measured, and their outcomes. Assumptions, risks, and issues. This terminology will definitely appear on a CAPM for the PMI exam. So you need to know what they mean. So an assumption in project management is a factor or information considered to be true or certain, even if there is no empirical proof. Okay? What goes sometimes what goes in project management, there's an assumption log. So everybody is on the same footing. That assumption log may include definitions regarding terminology, if it's specialized terminology. So an assumption log is a log that records all assumptions made during a project, along with the progress in confirming or testing them. Then there can be an issue. An issue is a current problem that could negatively impact a project's objectives or its deliverables. There may be kept by a project manager an issues log. The project manager will record, track, and try to resolve issues that occur during the course of the project. A risk is described as an unknown state that can influence the future. If something has occurred, it is a fact or an issue. If something is happening and there is no certainty that there is a risk, then it can lead to it's a risk, but there's also certainty to it. There's also something called a risk register. Project management, for instance, like a failure mode effect analysis, there might be a risk register that is logged so everybody knows ahead of time risks that come up or risks that they did not know would occur that is occurring, and so they put that in a risk register. Here's an example of a risk register. Okay, so you might provide a number ID for the risk. You document when the risk occurred, you provide details concerning the risk, you assess the probability, the severity, and the impact if the risk occurs. You might have a mitigation plan involved with it. If this risk occurs, this is what we're going to do as a project management team to address it. Then a contingency plan if it occurs and it can't be resolved and we need to work around or make it be a workaround, that would be a contingency plan. Then there would be an owner. In other words, the owner would be somebody that identified the risk, and then there would be the status of if it's open, that means that it can occur, or if it's closed, it means that we addressed it and it was taken care of. Here's the steps to creating a project charter. You identify the project's purposes and goals. You identify the stakeholders. You might create a stakeholder register or a stakeholder matrix, and you might use salience models and other models that will help you determine how important the stakeholder is and their involvement, and how and when they should be communicated regarding the project and the details of the project. You need to develop a project scope. Afterwards, you identify project risks. On the next slide, you'll see a decision tree that helps you decide what you would do when risks occur. Here's an example of a decision tree. Questions begging to be asked. Should we buy this software? If the answer is yes, do we go with one software or another software? If we buy one software, what's the probability that we'll pay in full for the software? 70%. If not, we'll make monthly payments. That would be at 30%. No, if we don't buy the software, which kind of free software should we use? Do you continue to use a present free software? The probability of that's 30%. Or do you use a friend's paid software? And whose you're going to use? Do we use David's or do we use Jake's? And the probability we would use David's is at about 75%. Continuing on with the steps for project charter creation, develop a project timeline, develop a project budget, document the project charter. That will be creating a document for people to sign off on, be able to share it to all the stakeholders that are going to be impacted by the project. Develop a communication plan. And a communication plan is there to let you know as the project team, or let the project team know who they're going to communicate with and when they are going to communicate with stakeholders. So here's an example of a communication plan. In a communication plan, you might state what devices you're going to use or what techniques or routes you're going to use to communicate key information to key stakeholders. You might use email, you might use instant messaging, for instance, software like Slack. You might use video conferencing like Zoom. You might use project software that provides updates, instant messages immediately to people. You might have in-person meetings, might have phone calls, might be a team collaboration platforms. You might have internal company intranet for dispensing information, might be newsletters, and might have a dedicated project management communication channel in whatever software you're using. So if, for example, you have 15 members on your project management team and you want to know how many channels of communication there are in between all of you, the formula for determining that, and you'll likely see that on the CAPM exam, is N is the number of stakeholders that need to be contacted. So it's N times the quantity N-1 divided by 2. And so the example below, the example is giving that there's 15 people on the project team. And so by using that formula, 105 routes of channels of communication are developed. If you look at the graphic on the right, it kind of gives you a graphical representation of all the channels, how they would play out. For instance, at the bottom, if you had 13 people, there would be 78 lines of communication with it. So make sure that you know that formula. Like I said before, you'll likely see it on the exam. This is simply another communications channel determination slide to consider. On this slide, you'll see an example taken from the internet of stakeholder registers. Stakeholder registers typically contains information regarding individual stakeholders or a stakeholder as a group. And for instance, in this one, it says the stakeholder, the name of the organization, their contact information, their preferred method for contacting them, their project role or their influence or interest on the role or on the project, their outcome expectations, their impact and influence score, so that might have been rated, their attitudes about the project, their interest in the project and their influence, and all their other associations. So that would be a useful tool for dispersing information regarding a project. Here we see an example of a stakeholder matrix developed by Mendelow. And if you can see, there's two axes on here. The y-axis is the power ranking, so that would be the stakeholder influence or power that they have regarding the project. And then on the x-axis, we have the stakeholder impact or interest in the project. So if you have a stakeholder that you identify as being high power or high interest, you definitely want to manage your information thoroughly and consider it before dispensing your information. If they have low power but high interest, you want to anticipate and meet their needs and keep them informed. If they have low interest and low power, you might want to provide little contact with them, a little bit of information provided to them, but at least monitor their interest in the project. And if they have low interest and high power, you want to keep them satisfied and informed. On the CAPM exam, there is questions regarding this, and they'll actually use the informed, keep informed, or monitor. So be aware of that for the exam if you decide to take it. This example is just showing you another stakeholder analysis matrix I lifted off the internet, and in essence it says it's very much similar, the same, and this can be used from Excel spreadsheet to keep track of who you need to communicate with regarding your stakeholders. This is what's known as a stakeholder salience model. The stakeholder salience model is a Venn diagram, and it has three zones in it. One is power, and that means you are establishing the authority that a stakeholder has over your project, the legitimacy of the stakeholder, and how appropriate their involvement is on the project, and then their urgency with getting the project completed or wanting to see it occur. So this is called the stakeholder model and salience model, and as you can see, I've used names in there just to you would plot that on there, and it gives you a graphical representation for easy analysis. In this presentation, I'll show you an example of what's known as a mood chart. I've also seen it categorized or stated as a mode chart. I'll just use mood chart. So what it does, it helps identify patterns related either to team members or even with stakeholder interactions. So it can be used in different capacities. And so it, as I have on here, it helps identify patterns. So team members can identify and recognize triggers that affects either team members or the stakeholders, as I said before. It helps to improve project outcomes. The team can make data-driven decisions by tracking moods and identifying patterns. In other words, let's say somebody has a bad day, they might not be in the right frame of mind to address a problem or an issue, and so you might keep track of that, and later on as a project manager you might want to keep track of that for later project team development and identify who works with who the best or even better. Increase self-awareness and accountability among team members. So you can, sometimes in some companies, they'll have these mood charts, and when you walk in, you'll just plop a little icon on the chart, and it'll tell everybody if you're having a good day, a bad day, something's going on in your personal life, and things like that. It helps to promote mental health. If you have a bad interaction with another project team manager or stakeholder, it allows you to express that you've had that type of interaction. You want everyone to know about it. Here's an example of a mood chart. So this is a graphical representation. And as I have on here, a mood chart is a metric that helps a project manager keep track of the personality of the stakeholder, the mood of the stakeholder, or the mood or reactions and mood trends of project team members. So if you notice at the top, there's a listing for the days, and on the left-hand side, it's either the stakeholder or the project manager, and it has their names on there. And you can see icons represent whether they're happy or approachable. They might be neutral, so ambivalent or cautious, or you should be cautious when approaching them. Or they might not be happy, or they're in disfavorable situation, and you might want to avoid approaching them. So that's a representation of a mood chart. This graphical provides a representation of what's known as an onion diagram. Just like an onion, you peel back the outside layers and you get to a different layer inside. That's the premise for calling it, I guess, an onion diagram. So if you notice in the diagram at the right, notice circled green layer is critical stakeholders. The red layer is affected stakeholders. The orange layer is enterprise stakeholders, so somebody within your organization that you have interactions with. And then finally, the external is the blue layer, the outside layer. And this is done for help for analyzing stakeholders and how you need to communicate with them and when you need to communicate with them. There's another tool that can be used by project managers and their project teams, and it's called a Net Promoter Score. And the Net Promoter Score is a metric used to measure customer loyalty and satisfaction with a company, a product, or a service. It is a customer experience metric that asks customers how they are likely to recommend a company to a colleague or a friend. The score is based on -100 to 100. Obviously, if it's negative, it's not a good score. If you go into the positive aspect, it's more favorable. How it's calculated, the NPS calculated by subtracting the percentage of detractors from the percentage of promoters. Promoters are customers who respond 9 to 10 to survey questions. Detractors respond to 0 to 6, and passives are 7 to 8. What it means, a higher score is better. A score of 0 is considered good. Bain & Company, the creators of the NPS, suggest that less than 0 is terrible, it's unfavorable, 50 is excellent, and 80 would be world class. And how it's used, millions of businesses use the NPS scoring system to measure how customers perceive them. And on the next slide, I'll show you an example of one. Here's an example of a Net Promoter Score chart. So you can see that there's just various stakeholders involved. So for one end of the spectrum, we have Microsoft, and maybe in this circumstance, they're rated a 10 or a 9. You have Tesla, you have some CEO, Burt Jones, you have Rose Holman, Indiana State President, Fred Clark, so on and so forth. And they get a rating, and from all of the promoters and detractors, figure out the percentage. And so we're seeing, at least in this example, that about 62% out of 345 total, that this has with an average score of 34, it has a favorable rating for this example. I've discussed this in other presentations. I'll just review this really quickly again. Here's a visual representation of a RACI chart. So you identify with stakeholders who's responsible, accountable, needs to be consulted, or needs to be kept informed. In a previous slide, I talked about a requirements management plan. So what is it and what's next? Well, the project initiation phase is the first step in a project's life cycle, where the project idea is defined, evaluated, and authorized to move on. During the initiation phase, you define the project develop the charter and get approved by management stakeholders. You identify and assign a PM, or they get assigned, and typically a project sponsor who's typically from the executive management does that. And then when you actually start the project, what's going to happen? So this is a responsibility of a project manager. You may develop a requirements management plan, and that is to help you identify the necessary resources and personnel and financial requirements. So this is a plan that's very specific just to being the project manager. Okay, and so the other things you're going to do with your requirements management plan is you're going to create a team. You're going to think about who you want to have on the team, who needs to be on the team. You're going to get input from several sources, especially including if executive management. Then you'll create a plan. You might have a scope of just the plan itself. You might have a budget related to that, and obviously it's going to be related to the project itself. And then finally, it is developing this plan, so you figure out, when am I going to have my kickoff meeting? And I'll talk about the specifics of the kickoff meeting later. So if you hear this or it's on the test, this is what a requirements management plan is for. It's specifically for the project manager for them to get aligned, the things that they need to do to manage the project. So some things that need to be done when you're doing a requirements management plan. Okay, so it has to be reviewed by all stakeholders once you get it together. Customers, users, development, design, management team, your team members, can be from departments within your organization and so forth. Okay, once you have this going, you're going to ask for them to approve it. If not by signing off of it, at least giving it some type of tacit approval. Requirements can either be known or unknown. You might not state that we don't know at this point, and that's why you're doing that to help determine what type of approach you're going to use, whether it's waterfall, iterative, incremental, or hybrid. And it's going to allow you to determine some things like your statement of work. You're going to include that or consider that when you put it together. So with the matrix I have here, your requirements management plan, you have your requirements you develop. You're going to talk about verification. I talked about that before with identifying, okay, what's the specifications here, what we need to do for the project management team. You need to discuss or consider, how are we going to go about doing change management and have a change management plan. You're going to be considering what type of information gathering techniques you're going to use, whatever type of elicitation technique if needs to be done. And then you're going to have requirements definitions that'll be involved in this document, provided you decide to use it, and then some requirements analysis. So from the project charter to the requirements management plan, you identify the project stakeholders, you set project goals, you meet with stakeholders, you identify, name, and list each requirement from the stakeholders. So you're probably going to interview them and ask them, say, okay, what really, from your perspective, is important for doing this project and doing it correctly. So you use those elicitation techniques that I talked about before. You'll add requirements descriptions. You give a categorization. In other words, you may rank them from 1 to 10 of what is required and who is requiring these things. You might delegate tasks for the project team to develop this plan, and you may share your plan with stakeholders and seek their approval once you've got it together. With this slide, I'm just listing all of the elicitation techniques that you can use, or a project manager ought to use, just as a reminder of what we've talked about. And also, I've included this YouTube link because I think they do a fairly good job at explaining them. With the end of this lecture, be sure to know and understand the parts of the initiation phase regarding document development and their flow, aspects regarding feasibility study, statement of work, and the project charter, be able to determine the number of channels of communication for stakeholders, project members, or just general communication, know and recognize the use of stakeholder matrices and models for effective and considerate communication, know that a PM develops and uses a requirements management plan and the aspects of the plan for managing the project and the project team members.